There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over you when you're getting close to retirement age and you start doing the math for real. Not the rough math you've been doing in your head for years, the optimistic kind, where everything works out. The real math, the kind where you actually sit down, open a spreadsheet or a notepad, and start writing down numbers. And somewhere in that process, a lot of people hit a moment where the confidence they thought they had starts to feel a little less solid. Can you retire with $1 million, or is it already too late? Maybe you have $1 million saved. Maybe you're close. Maybe you're not there yet, and you're wondering if you ever will be. But here's what's interesting, and what this video is really about. Even the people who hit that $1 million mark aren't always sure they're okay. And there's a reason for that. A real one. Not just anxiety. Not just pessimism. The way most of us were taught to think about retirement savings is incomplete. Not wrong exactly. Incomplete. And that gap between what we assumed and what's actually true is where a lot of retirements quietly run into trouble. So let's talk about it honestly. Not as a finance lecture, just as a conversation about what retirement actually looks like in this country right now. The $1 million number has been floating around as the gold standard for so long that most people have stopped questioning it. It became cultural shorthand. Save $1 million and you're set. That was the message from financial advisors, from magazine articles, from your co-workers at the office. Hit 7 figures and you've done your job. For a lot of men in particular, that number carried a certain weight beyond just finances. It was proof that you'd provided, that you'd been disciplined, that you'd done what you were supposed to do for 40 years. There's real pride attached to that milestone, and I don't want to dismiss that. It means something. But here's the question nobody asked. Where did that number come from? And does it still mean what it meant 30 years ago? Because in 1994, $1 million was genuinely substantial. Inflation was different. Healthcare costs were different. People weren't expected to fund 30 years of retirement the way they are now. The number has stayed the same in the cultural conversation, but the world around it has changed significantly. And when you look at what $1 million actually generates as retirement income today, not what it sounds like, but what it actually produces, the picture gets more complicated. Here's the basic math, and I'll keep it simple because that's the point. For decades, the standard retirement guideline was something called the 4% rule. The idea was straightforward. If you withdraw 4% of your savings each year, your money should last about 30 years. On $1 million, that's $40,000 a year, roughly $3,300 a month, before taxes. That number has been the foundation of most people's retirement thinking for a generation. The problem is that Morningstar, one of the most respected research firms in this space, now puts the safe withdrawal rate closer to 3.7 to 3.9%, not 4%. And the man who actually created the 4% rule, a financial planner named Bill Bengen, has acknowledged that people retiring early may be shortchanging themselves by relying on it too rigidly. On $1 million, the difference between 4% and 3.7% is about $3,000 a year less income. That might not sound devastating, but compounded over 30 years, it's significant. And that's before you factor in taxes, inflation, or the expense that most retirement calculators quietly leave off the page entirely. Healthcare. This is the one that catches people off guard more than anything else. Fidelity does an annual study on healthcare costs in retirement. Their 2025 numbers show that a 65-year-old retiring today should expect to spend roughly $172,500 on healthcare over the course of their retirement. That's a single person. For a couple, you're looking at $345,000. And that's not including long-term care, assisted living, nursing home costs, home health aides, None of that is in those numbers. Think about what that means on $1 million nest egg. Healthcare alone could consume more than 17% of everything you've saved. And that's the median estimate, not a worst-case scenario. What makes this particularly hard is the psychological shift that happens the day you leave your job. Most people who've worked for a company have had their healthcare subsidized for decades. You paid your portion and your employer paid the rest. And you probably didn't think too much about the full cost. The day you retire, that changes. Either you're paying full freight for coverage until Medicare kicks in at 65, or if you retire after 65, you're navigating Medicare premiums, supplemental plans, prescription drug coverage, and out-of-pocket limits that can add up to several $100s a month, even when you're reasonably healthy. And healthcare is the one expense you genuinely cannot predict or control. You can budget for your mortgage, you can adjust your grocery spending, you can cut back on travel, but you can't decide not to get sick. You can't negotiate what a hospital charges. You can't plan around a diagnosis. Nearly 1 in 5 retirees, 17%, enter retirement with no plan for healthcare costs at all. That's not recklessness. That's just how invisible this expense has been in most retirement planning conversations. Now, let's talk about something that most people have genuinely never heard of, but that financial researchers consider one of the most serious risks in retirement planning. It's called sequence of returns risk, and the short version is this: the order in which market gains and losses happen during your retirement matters enormously, more than the average return, more than how aggressive or conservative your portfolio is. Here's why. When you're still working and your 401k drops 20%, you don't actually lock in that loss. You keep contributing. The market recovers, your account recovers, and you move on. The loss was painful on paper, but you had time on your side. In retirement, that changes completely. You're not adding to the account anymore. You're withdrawing from it. So, when the market drops and you pull money out to cover your living expenses, you're selling shares at the bottom. And those shares aren't there to recover when the market bounces back. Morningstar's research found that a 15% portfolio decline in the first year of retirement, combined with regular withdrawals, makes running out of money over a 30-year retirement 6 times more likely. Not 50% more likely, not twice as likely, 6 times. Think about 2008. Think about early 2020. The markets recovered both times. But people who retired in 2007 or 2008 and were drawing down their savings during those drops, many of them never fully caught up, even as everyone else around them watched their portfolios recover. This is why the timing of retirement isn't just a personal or emotional decision. It has direct financial consequences that compound for decades. 2 people with identical savings, identical investment portfolios, and identical withdrawal strategies can have vastly different outcomes depending purely on what the market was doing in the first 5 years of their retirement. That's a hard truth, and it's one that most retirement projections don't adequately account for. While we're talking about the decisions that matter most, there's one that most people underestimate more than any other, more than their investment allocation, more than their savings rate in the final years of work. Social Security timing. Most people know, in a general way, that you can claim Social Security early or wait. What most people don't fully grasp is how large the difference actually is. If you claim Social Security at 62, the earliest eligible age, your monthly benefit is substantially reduced, permanently. If you wait until 70, the latest age at which benefits continue to grow, your monthly payment is roughly 75% higher than what you'd receive at 62 for the rest of your life. Let me put some numbers to that. At 62, Social Security might replace about 28% of your pre-retirement earnings. At 70, it can replace more than 50%. That gap in guaranteed monthly income affects every other financial decision you make in retirement. It affects how much you need to withdraw from savings. It affects how vulnerable you are to sequence of returns risk. It affects whether you can absorb a healthcare expense without emptying an account. Researchers have found that delaying Social Security from 62 to 67, a 5-year difference, increases your benefit by roughly 8% per year beyond full retirement age. And here's the comparison that tends to stop people. Waiting until 70 to claim Social Security produces roughly the same lifetime income benefit as earning a guaranteed 6.5% annual return on your investments. A guaranteed return, which doesn't exist anywhere else. The reason most people claim early isn't because they've run the numbers and it made sense. It's because the money feels real and available, and waiting feels like leaving something on the table. There's something deeply human about that. You worked for those benefits. Why wait? But the math is unambiguous. For most people who are in reasonably good health, delaying Social Security is the single most powerful lever they have in retirement planning. More powerful than stock selection, more powerful than trying to time the market. Here's something else that gets talked about less than it should. Nearly half of Americans who retired in recent years left work earlier than they planned. Not by choice, not because everything worked out perfectly, and they decided to enjoy life sooner. The average American worker expects to retire around age 66. The average age at which people actually stop working is 61, 5 years earlier than planned. The reasons vary. A health issue that made continued work difficult or impossible, a company restructuring that eliminated the job, a spouse or parent who needed care, an industry that changed and left experienced workers behind. These aren't edge cases. They're common, and they happen to people who had a plan, people who were 5 years away from where they needed to be financially. What this means practically is that the retirement calculation you're running in your head right now probably assumes you'll work until you decide to stop. It probably doesn't include a realistic scenario where something outside your control ends your working years early. Most retirement plans don't, and that's a significant vulnerability, because 5 fewer years of contributions, combined with 5 more years of withdrawals, combined with claiming Social Security earlier than intended, that combination changes the math considerably. And what does running out of money actually look like? Not in a dramatic, catastrophic sense. In the real daily sense, it doesn't announce itself. It starts quietly. You stop going to the dentist as often as you should. You put off the appointment you've been meaning to make because you're not sure what the copay will be or what they might find. You don't go visit the grandkids as much because plane tickets feel extravagant now. You keep the thermostat at a temperature that isn't quite comfortable because the energy bill went up again. 1 in 10 retirees in this country has gone back to work, not because they wanted to stay active or stay connected, but because they needed the income. And for every person who's gone back to work, there are many more who've made the smaller adjustments, the ones nobody talks about at family dinners, that signal a retirement that isn't going the way it was supposed to. About 2 in 3 Americans say they're more afraid of running out of money than they are of dying. Let that sit for a moment. Not afraid of death, afraid of the slow erosion of independence that comes when the money runs out before the life does. Because that's what this is really about. It's not about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about being able to live in your own home, being able to make your own decisions, not having to ask your kids for help, not becoming the person at the Thanksgiving table that everyone feels sorry for or worried about. Most people would rather not exist than lose their independence, and the fear of financial fragility in retirement is, at its core, the fear of exactly that. So let's shift direction. Because here's what I think most of this conversation misses. The question, do I have enough, is actually the wrong question. Or at least it's incomplete. The right question is, do I have a strategy? $1 million with no strategy can run out. $400,000 with a thoughtful, well-constructed approach can last a lifetime. The number matters less than what you do with it and when. The people who navigate retirement well, who look back at 80 and find that their money outlasted their fears, they tend to share a few common habits, not complicated ones, not clever financial tricks. The first is a cash buffer, keeping 2 to 3 years of living expenses in something liquid and stable. Not in the market, not chasing returns, means that if the market drops in year 1 or year 2 of your retirement, you don't have to sell anything. You live off the cash. You let the portfolio recover. That simple buffer dramatically reduces your exposure to the sequence risk we talked about earlier. The second is a realistic healthcare budget, not optimistic, realistic. Set aside money specifically for healthcare outside of your regular living expense budget. Treat it like a separate account with a specific purpose, because that's exactly what it is. The third is a serious, honest look at Social Security timing. Not what feels natural, not what your neighbor did. The math. Run the scenarios. Understand what the difference between 62 and 67 or 70 actually means in monthly income for the rest of your life. And the fourth is something that's harder to hear, but genuinely worth considering. Working a little longer if you can. Not because retirement isn't something you've earned, but because the research is clear that working 6 months longer has roughly the same financial impact as earning a guaranteed 6.5% return on your investments for a full year. The years just before retirement are in many ways the most financially powerful years of your working life. Every additional month you work is a month you're contributing rather than withdrawing, a month your portfolio stays intact, a month your Social Security benefit grows. That's not a lecture about staying at a job you hate. It's just an honest accounting of what time is worth at this particular stage. There's a survey from the Transamerica Institute that looked at retirement regrets, and the numbers are worth hearing plainly. 76% of retirees wish they had saved more consistently throughout their working years. Not bigger amounts necessarily, just more consistently. Without the gaps, without the years where it felt optional. 68% wish they had understood investing better before they retired. 49% say they waited too long to start thinking seriously about retirement planning. Those aren't the regrets of people who were careless or reckless. Those are the regrets of people who were busy, raising families, managing careers, dealing with life, who assumed they'd figure it out when the time came. And then the time came faster than expected, and the plan was less complete than they'd imagined. But here's the thing about those numbers. They're not a verdict, they're a warning. And warnings are only useful if there's still time to do something. If you're 60 or 63 or 67, there are still meaningful decisions in front of you. Social Security timing for most people is still a live question. How you structure withdrawals is still a decision to be made. Whether you have a healthcare budget is still correctable. Whether you have a cash cushion is still buildable. The window isn't infinite, but for most people watching this, it's still open. I want to come back to where we started. The person who saved, who planned, who followed the rules, and still sat down with that notepad and felt uncertain. I don't think that uncertainty is a failure of nerve. I think it's an honest response to a retirement landscape that's more complicated than the simple story we were all told. $1 million is not a guarantee, but it's also not a ceiling, and it's not the whole story. The number is less important than what you do with it, when you start drawing from it, what you've budgeted for healthcare, and whether you've protected those first 5 years from the kind of market volatility that can lock in failure before you've had a chance to adjust. Most people aren't afraid of retirement itself. They're afraid of getting there and discovering that the plan had a gap they didn't know about, that the thing they'd been working toward for 4 decades wasn't quite what they thought it was. That fear is reasonable, and it's worth taking seriously. But knowledge changes things. Understanding the actual risks, not the vague, generalized worry, but the specific, concrete ones, gives you something to work with. It turns anxiety into action, and action, even modest action taken at the right time, can make a larger difference than most people realize. The question isn't really whether you can retire with $1 million. The question is whether you have a plan that accounts for the things that actually determine whether retirement works. And that's a question worth sitting with.